The deafening crack of a gunshot split the air as Sarah Fletcher ducked behind the water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't the first time Sweetwater Creek had seen violence, but it was the first time she'd been caught in the crossfire after discovering her husband in the arms of another woman. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The town of Sweetwater Creek had sprouted like a stubborn weed along the railway line, attracting all manner good and bad to its dusty streets. Sarah had arrived 3 years prior as a bright-eyed bride, full of hope and dreams. Now, at 24, those dreams lay shattered at her feet like the whiskey bottles her husband Thomas frequently emptied. "Get back inside, you fools." Sheriff Willard shouted, his weathered face contorted with frustration as townspeople scattered from the saloon brawl that had spilled onto the street. Sarah remained crouched, her cotton dress stained with mud. She'd only ventured into town to confront Thomas after Mabel Johnson had whispered the truth to her at church last Sunday. "Everyone knows," Mabel had said with barely concealed satisfaction. "He's been keeping company with that new girl at the Golden Palace Saloon." Sarah had refused to believe it until she saw it with her own eyes, Thomas's hands caressing another woman's waist, his lips pressed against her neck in the alley behind the saloon. The pain had been immediate and blinding, like a physical blow to her chest. "Madam, you all right?" A deep voice startled her, and Sarah looked up into the face of a stranger. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, not the flashy gear of the gamblers who passed through town. His eyes, a startling shade of green, showed genuine concern beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. "I'm fine," she lied, attempting to rise with dignity despite her trembling knees. The stranger offered his hand. "Ethan Parker, just rode in from Montana Territory." Sarah hesitated before accepting his help. His hand was calloused but warm, and he pulled her to her feet with gentle strength. "Sarah Fletcher," she replied, withdrawing her hand quickly. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Parker, but I should be getting home." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as he surveyed the chaos. "Might be safer if I walk with you, Mrs. Fletcher. These situations tend to get worse before they get better." Before Sarah could respond, another shot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. She flinched involuntarily. "Please," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "Let me see you safely home." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she felt. Her small homestead lay just outside town, a modest cabin that Thomas had built when they first arrived, full of optimism and plans for the future. The land had proven harsher than expected, the winters longer, and Thomas's determination shorter. They walked in silence along the rutted dirt road that led away from town. Spring had barely touched the landscape. Patches of snow still lingered in the shadows of rocks and trees. Sarah wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, conscious of the stranger beside her. "New in town?" she finally asked, if only to break the uncomfortable silence. "Just passing through," Ethan replied. "Looking for work. Heard the Double R Ranch might be hiring." "They are," Sarah confirmed. "Lost some men over the winter, influenza." Ethan nodded grimly. "Disease was as much an enemy on the frontier as any outlaw. You and your husband been here long?" Sarah's step faltered. 3 years, my husband." She paused, unsure how to explain the situation to a complete stranger. "He works at the sawmill, when he's working." Understanding flickered in Ethan's eyes, but he asked no further questions. They crested a small rise, and Sarah's cabin came into view, a simple structure with a vegetable garden just beginning to show green shoots, a chicken coop, and a small barn. Smoke curled from the chimney. Sarah had left the fire banked before heading to town. "This is me," she said unnecessarily, stopping at the gate in the rough fence that encircled the yard. Ethan removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair in need of a trim. "Mrs. Fletcher, I don't mean to pry, but are you going to be all right? That was quite a scene in town." Sarah managed a tight smile. "It's not the first time. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Parker, but I can manage." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Well, if you need anything, I expect I'll be at the Double R if they take me on." "Thank you for the escort," Sarah said formally, already turning toward the cabin. "Mrs. Fletcher," Ethan called after her, When she looked back, his expression was serious. "Whatever trouble you're in, just remember not all men are the same." Sarah felt a flicker of something indignation, perhaps, or surprise at his presumption, but before she could formulate a response, he had replaced his hat and was already walking back toward town. The cabin felt emptier than usual when Sarah entered. The silence was a reminder of all that was missing from her life: children's laughter, companionship, love. She had married Thomas Fletcher at 18, captivated by his charm and dreams of a life out west. The son of a Boston merchant, Thomas had rebelled against his father's plans for him to join the family business. He had painted such vivid pictures of their future together: a prosperous ranch, a house filled with children, respect in a growing community. Reality had proven harsher. The land demanded more than Thomas was willing to give. The winters were brutal, the summers short. Within a year, Thomas had started drinking. By the second year, he was spending more nights in town than at home. Now, in their third year of marriage, Sarah realized she barely knew the man she had followed across the country. Sarah stoked the fire and prepared a simple supper, though she had little appetite. As darkness fell, she kept expecting to hear Thomas's unsteady footsteps on the porch, his fumbling with the latch. But the night remained quiet, and eventually, Sarah blew out the lamp and climbed into the cold bed alone. The next morning, Sarah was feeding the chickens when she heard the approach of a horse. Shielding her eyes against the morning sun, she was surprised to see Ethan Parker riding toward her cabin. "Mr. Parker," she called as he dismounted, "what brings you out this way?" "Got the job at Double R," he explained, leading his horse to the fence. "Thought you might want to know what happened after you left town yesterday." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Was anyone hurt?" "Your husband got himself arrested," Ethan said bluntly. "Sheriff's keeping him until he sobers up." There was some damage to the saloon, but nothing serious. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you for telling me." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Sheriff asked me to let you know that Thomas has been fired from the sawmill. Owners had enough of his absences." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. The sawmill job had been their main source of income. Without it, they wouldn't be able to make payments on the land. "I see," she managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Mrs. Fletcher, Sarah," Ethan said, his voice gentler now. "I don't mean to overstep, but is there someone who can help you?" "Family nearby," Sarah shook her head. "My parents are back east, Thomas's family." She trailed off. Thomas had severed ties with his wealthy family when they disapproved of his Western ambitions. "What will you do?" The question hung in the air. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing since seeing Thomas with that woman. "I'm not sure yet," she admitted, "but I won't starve. I can sew, and I've been selling eggs in town." Ethan glanced around the homestead with an appraising eye. "Your garden looks well tended. Land's not bad here." "It could be productive with enough work," Sarah agreed. It was what had drawn them here initially, the promise of the land. "Well," Ethan said, replacing his hat, "I should get on to the ranch." "Just wanted to make sure you knew what was happening." "I appreciate it," Sarah said sincerely. "It seems I'm in your debt twice over now." Ethan's smile transformed his weathered face. "No debt, madam, just being neighborly." As he mounted his horse, Sarah found herself reluctant to see him go. "Mr. Parker," she called impulsively, "the Double R is a fair ride from town. If you ever need a meal closer by, my door is open." The invitation surprised them both. Ethan touched the brim of his hat. "I'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Fletcher. Good day to you." 3 days passed before Thomas returned. Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard him approach, his footsteps dragging in the dirt. One look at his face told her everything: the bloodshot eyes, the stubble on his chin, the sullen set of his mouth. "Where have you been?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Don't start," Thomas warned, pushing past her into the cabin. Sarah followed him inside, anger suddenly replacing the hurt she'd carried for days. "You were with her again, weren't you, that woman from the saloon?" Thomas whirled on her, his handsome face twisted with rage and shame. "What do you know about it? What do you know about anything? Stuck out here playing at being a frontier wife." "I know you lost your job," Sarah shot back. "I know we can't make the next payment on this land without it." Thomas laughed bitterly. "This land, this worthless patch of dirt, we were fools to come here, Sarah. You were the one who wanted this life. You promised me I was wrong, Thomas shouted. Is that what you want to hear? I was wrong about everything, this land, this life. He gestured helplessly around the cabin. The word landed like a slap. Sarah took a step back, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in front of him. Lily understands, Thomas continued, his voice dropping. She doesn't expect me to be something I'm not. Lily, Sarah repeated hollowly. The other woman had a name now. She's coming with me, Thomas said, moving to the chest at the foot of their bed. He began pulling out his clothes, stuffing them haphazardly into a canvas bag. We're going to California. There's nothing for me here. What about me? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. What about our vows? Thomas paused, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw regret in his eyes, but then his expression hardened. I'm sorry, Sarah, I truly am, but I can't do this anymore, so you're just leaving. After everything we've built, Thomas gestured around the sparse cabin. What have we built, Sarah? A failing farm, a marriage that's been empty for months. He sighed heavily. The land payment is due in 2 weeks. I don't have the money for it. You should go back east to your parents. Sarah stood frozen as Thomas continued packing. The shock was giving way to a strange sense of clarity. This moment, this abandonment had been coming for longer than she wanted to admit. What about the homestead? She finally asked. We've put 3 years into this land. Sell it if you can, Thomas said with a shrug. Though I doubt anyone will buy it. Less than an hour later, Thomas Fletcher walked out of Sarah's life, taking their horse and what little money they had saved. Sarah watched him go, standing rigidly in the doorway until his figure disappeared over the ridge toward town. Only then did she allow herself to sink to the floor and weep, not for the love she had lost. For that had withered long ago, but for the dreams that had died, for the future she had planned, for the children she had hoped would fill this cabin with laughter. Night fell, and still Sarah sat by the cold hearth, numb with shock and grief. The practical part of her mind was already calculating how long could she survive on what she had. The garden was just beginning to produce, the chickens gave eggs, but without money for the land payment, she would lose everything in 2 weeks. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Hastily wiping her eyes, Sarah rose and opened it cautiously. Ethan Parker stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Fletcher, I apologize for the late hour, but I saw your husband ride through town earlier. He seemed in a hurry. Sarah stared at him, too exhausted for pretense. He's gone, she said simply. Left me for a woman named Lily. They're bound for California. Ethan's expression darkened. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Sarah asked, a bitter edge to her voice. You hardly know me. I know enough, Ethan replied quietly. No woman deserves to be abandoned, especially not out here. The genuine concern in his voice broke through Sarah's fragile composure. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away, embarrassed by her weakness. Mrs. Fletcher, Sarah, Ethan said gently. Is there anything I can do? Sarah laughed through her tears. Unless you can pay the land note that's due in 2 weeks, I don't think so. Ethan was silent for a moment. How much is the payment? $20, Sarah replied. Might as well be $1,000 for all the chance I have of raising it. I have some savings, Ethan said slowly. Not much, but no, Sarah interrupted firmly. I wasn't asking for charity, Mr. Parker. I've never taken handouts, and I don't intend to start now. Ethan nodded, respecting her pride. What will you do? Sarah squared her shoulders. I'll figure something out, I always do. Well, Ethan said, replacing his hat, if you need help with anything around the place, repairs, heavy lifting, you let me know. The ranch gives us Sundays off. After he left, Sarah sat thinking long into the night. By morning, she had formed a plan. She would approach Mrs. Hollister, the dressmaker in town, about taking on sewing work. She would sell eggs and whatever vegetables the garden produced. She would find a way to make that payment and the next after that. This land might have been Thomas's dream initially, but now it was hers, the only thing she had left. The following Sunday, Sarah was surprised to see Ethan riding up to her cabin again. This time he carried a burlap sack and a toolbox. Mr. Parker, she greeted him cautiously. What brings you here? Noticed your roof needed some patching when I was here last, he said, dismounting. Brought some tools and materials, won't take long. Sarah wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, but practicality won out. The roof did leak during heavy rains, and she lacked both the materials and the skill to fix it. "I can pay you with a meal," she offered. "It's not much, but deal," Ethan agreed with a smile that reached his eyes. While Ethan worked on the roof, Sarah prepared the best meal she could manage: rabbit stew with vegetables from her garden, cornbread baked in the cast iron skillet. The familiar tasks of cooking soothed her, bringing a sense of normalcy to days that had been anything but normal since Thomas's departure. They ate outside on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. The easy silence between them surprised Sarah. It had been so long since she'd experienced comfortable companionship. "How are you finding the double R?" she asked eventually. "Good outfit," Ethan replied. "Fair boss, decent men, pays not great, but it's steady." "Have you been cowboying long?" Ethan nodded. "Since I was 16, started as a horse wrangler in Texas, worked my way up, been all over Kansas, Nebraska, Montana." "What brought you to Wyoming?" A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "Needed a change of scenery." When Sarah raised an eyebrow, he elaborated reluctantly. "Was foreman on a ranch in Montana. Owner's daughter and I, well, her father didn't approve, made it clear I should move on." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. Ethan shrugged. "For the best, probably. She was young, had grand ideas about ranch life that didn't match reality." He glanced at Sarah. "Not unlike someone else I've heard about." Sarah smiled ruefully. "Thomas, you mean? Yes, I suppose so. The difference is I was willing to work for those dreams." "That makes all the difference," Ethan agreed. "Dreams are fine things, but without work to back them up, they stay dreams." The next day, Sarah approached Mrs. Hollister as planned. The older woman was sympathetic to Sarah's situation. News of Thomas's abandonment had already spread through town and agreed to pay her for sewing work that could be done at home. "It won't be much, Mrs. Hollister warned, but it's something." "Something is all I need," Sarah replied with determination. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah worked from dawn until well past dusk. She tended her garden, cared for the chickens, completed sewing orders for Mrs. Hollister, and even took in laundry from some of the single men in town. Every penny was carefully saved toward the land payment. Each Sunday, Ethan would ride over. He never came empty-handed, always bringing something the homestead needed, or that would make Sarah's life easier. A repaired chair one week, a sharpened axe the next, seeds for the garden after that. Sarah protested that he was doing too much, but Ethan waved away her concerns. "Gives me something useful to do on my day off," he insisted. "Better than losing my wages in a card game." The day before the land payment was due, Sarah counted her savings with trembling hands. Despite her best efforts, she was still $5 short. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. She would go to town in the morning, speak with the land office, beg for an extension if necessary. That evening, as Sarah was preparing for bed, she heard a horse approaching. Grabbing Thomas's old shotgun, one of the few useful things he'd left behind, she cautiously opened the door. Ethan dismounted quickly. "Sarah, I need to talk to you." Something in his tone alarmed her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he assured her. "But I heard in town today that the land office agent is leaving tomorrow on the afternoon stage. He won't be back for a month." Sarah's heart sank. "I don't have enough for the payment yet. I'm $5 short." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I want you to take this." Sarah shook her head. "Ethan, no, I told you I won't accept charity." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's an investment." "Investment?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about this for a while now. You need help with this land, not just repairs, but working it properly, and I'm tired of cowboying for other men." "What are you suggesting?" "A partnership," Ethan said. "I put in some money and labor, you provide the land and your skills. We split whatever profits come. Fair and square, businesslike." Sarah stared at him, trying to process his offer. "Why would you do this? This land isn't much, it could be," Ethan interrupted. "With 2 people working it properly, this could be a fine small ranch, good water source, decent grazing for a modest herd." "People would talk," Sarah said hesitantly. "A woman alone working with a single man. Let them talk," Ethan replied firmly. "We'd keep everything proper. I can build a small cabin for myself on the far side of the property." Sarah studied his face in the fading light. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." Ethan confirmed. "I've saved nearly every penny I've earned at the Double R. It's enough to buy a few head of cattle, some better tools. Between your garden and chickens and a small cattle operation, we could make this work." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest for the first time in weeks. "A real partnership. You wouldn't try to take over?" "Equal partners," Ethan promised. "Everything in writing if you want. And if it doesn't work out, or if you want me to leave at any point, I go no arguments." Sarah considered the offer, weighing her limited options against the opportunity Ethan presented. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," Ethan said, pressing the pouch into her hand. "But either way, take this for tomorrow's payment. Consider it a loan if nothing else." The next morning, Sarah rode into town, Ethan's money secure in her pocket. At the land office, she paid the full amount due, relief washing over her as the agent stamped her receipt. "Next payment's due in 3 months, Mrs. Fletcher," he reminded her. "Don't cut it so close next time." "I won't," Sarah promised, already calculating how much the land might produce with proper care with Ethan's help. On her way out of town, Sarah passed the Golden Palace Saloon. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of a young woman with copper-colored hair. Lily, she presumed. The sight didn't bring the pain she had expected. Instead, Sarah felt only a vague pity for the woman who would eventually discover, as she had, that Thomas Fletcher's promises were as substantial as smoke. When Sarah returned to the homestead, she found Ethan waiting, leaning against the fence with an anxious expression that cleared when he saw her. "All settled?" he asked as she dismounted. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Thank you for the loan. Does that mean you're considering my offer?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I am, but I have conditions." "Name them." "Everything in writing, as you suggested, clear boundaries, and I want your word, Ethan Parker, that you won't make promises you can't keep." Ethan's gaze held her steadily. "I promise you, Sarah Fletcher, I am not Thomas. When I give my word, I keep it." Over the following months, the partnership began to take shape. True to his word, Ethan built a small cabin for himself on the far corner of the property. He left his job at the Double R and invested his savings in the homestead, purchasing tools, seed, and 5 head of cattle to start their small herd. Sarah continued her sewing work for Mrs. Hollister, but with Ethan's help, the garden flourished as never before. They expanded the chicken coop, added a pig pen, and by midsummer, the homestead was beginning to look like a proper working farm. The townsfolk gossiped, of course. Some speculated that Sarah and Ethan were secretly married, others whispered more scandalous theories. But as the weeks passed, and the unusual arrangement continued with perfect propriety, the gossip gradually subsided. What didn't subside were the feelings growing between them. Sarah found herself looking forward to their shared meals, to the sound of Ethan's whistle as he worked in the fields, to his quiet company in the evenings when they would sit on the porch and plan the next day's tasks. For his part, Ethan was careful never to overstep. He treated Sarah with unfailing respect, never presuming upon their partnership or her vulnerable position. If his gaze sometimes lingered on her longer than necessary, if his hand sometimes brushed hers when passing tools or dishes, neither of them acknowledged it. Autumn came, painting the surrounding hills with gold and crimson. The garden yielded a bountiful harvest that Sarah preserved for winter. Their small herd had grown with the addition of 2 calves, and Ethan had repaired and expanded the barn to accommodate them. On a crisp October evening, Sarah and Ethan sat on the porch after a long day of work. The sunset painted the sky in spectacular colors, and a comfortable silence stretched between them. "I received a letter today," Sarah said finally, breaking the quiet. "From Thomas." Ethan's posture stiffened slightly. "What did he want?" "Nothing, really. He wrote to tell me he and Lily have settled in Sacramento. He's working as a clerk in her uncle's store." Sarah shook her head, bemused. "He actually asked if I would send the books he left behind. Are you going to?" Sarah considered the question. "I suppose I should. They're of no use to me." She glanced at Ethan. "Does it bother you that he wrote?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you?" "No," Sarah replied, surprised to realize the truth of it. "I feel nothing, not anger, not hurt. It's as if he's a stranger who once passed through my life." "That's good," Ethan said softly. "You deserve better than what he gave you." "I've found better," Sarah said, meeting his gaze directly. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken words. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Sarah, she waited, her heart pounding. "I don't want to presume," he continued carefully. "Our arrangement has worked well, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize it, but I find myself—" He faltered, uncharacteristically unsure. "Yes." Sarah prompted gently. "I find myself thinking of you as more than a business partner," Ethan admitted. "Much more." Sarah felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "I've been thinking the same." "Have you?" Relief and hope mingled in Ethan's expression. "I wasn't sure. After what happened with Thomas, I thought you might not want—" "Thomas made promises he never intended to keep," Sarah interrupted. "He spoke of love but never showed it through his actions." She reached out hesitantly, laying her hand over Ethan's. "You've never once promised me anything you didn't deliver." Ethan turned his hand to clasp hers. "Sarah, I want you to know something. I'm not a man for fancy words or grand gestures, but I promise you this: if you'll have me, your heart is safe with me. I'll protect it and you for as long as you'll let me." The simple sincerity of his words moved Sarah deeply. This was not Thomas's glib charm or empty promises. This was Ethan's steady, honest, dependable Ethan offering her not just his heart, but the security of knowing he meant every word. "I believe you," she whispered, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Ethan leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Sarah responded, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time." "Why didn't you?" Sarah asked, smiling. "Wasn't sure you were ready," Ethan replied honestly, "and I meant what I said about being proper. This land is yours, Sarah. I never wanted you to think I had designs on it or on you when I offered the partnership." "I know," Sarah said softly. "That's one of the reasons I trust you." Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, blanketing the homestead in deep snow and keeping them largely isolated from town. Sarah and Ethan married in December, with only the Reverend, Mrs. Hollister, and a few friends from the Double R as witnesses. They merged their separate cabins, expanding Sarah's original home with lumber they had harvested and milled themselves. The evenings were spent planning for spring, a larger garden, more cattle, perhaps even horses to breed. On a particularly cold January night, as they lay wrapped in each other's warmth beneath thick quilts, Sarah traced the line of Ethan's jaw with her fingertip. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. "With this life, I mean. It's not grand or exciting." Ethan caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Sarah Parker, I have everything I could ever want right here. Land that's ours, work that means something, and you beside me." He smiled in the darkness. "What more could a man ask for? Children, perhaps?" Sarah suggested hesitantly. "Someday," Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I would like that very much. A house full of children with your eyes and your spirit. And your steadiness," Sarah added. "Your honesty." As they drifted toward sleep, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Thomas's betrayal, which had seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning of something far better: a partnership based on respect and shared dreams. A love built slowly and carefully on a foundation of trust. By spring, the snow melted to reveal a landscape bursting with new life. The cattle grazed contentedly in greening pastures, the garden sprouted promising rows of vegetables, and Sarah discovered she was expecting their first child. Standing together on their porch, Ethan's hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly, they surveyed the homestead that had flourished under their joint care. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Sarah admitted. "After Thomas left, I thought that part of my life was over." Ethan kissed her temple. "Sometimes the best dreams aren't the ones we start with, but the ones we find along the way." Sarah leaned into his embrace, secure in the knowledge that her heart was indeed safe, that the promise Ethan had made that autumn evening had been kept, and would continue to be kept through all the seasons of their lives together. Years later, when their homestead had grown into a prosperous small ranch, when their children played in the yard where Sarah had once stood alone and abandoned, she would sometimes think of how close she had come to giving up. How the end of one dream had led to the beginning of something far better than she could have imagined. And in the quiet moments, when Ethan would catch her eye across a room full of family and friends, his smile would still carry the same promise unspoken now, but no less true than the day he first made it that her heart was safe with him, and always would be.